Welcome, friend. Follow me. We're going somewhere dark, somewhere dangerous. Most people would never dare enter the place we are going. There's no telling what horrors we'll find, what terrors we'll uncover. Don't say I didn't warn you. We might discover terrible monsters lurking there. Be careful, they could follow you out, or maybe they're already inside you. Are you afraid? Good. Now you are ready to enter the Warning Woods. "Did you buy this house?" asked a small voice behind Quentin Giles as he tipped back a hand truck loaded with boxes. He looked over his shoulder, mostly to make sure he was in line with the moving truck's ramp, and saw a young boy standing next to it. Yeah," Quentin grunted. He guided the hand truck down, sweat pouring from his forehead. It was one of the hottest days on record, and he was glad he and his family were almost finished unloading. "Do you have any kids?" the boy asked as Quentin pivoted past him. "I'll send them out," he replied with a curt nod. He didn't mean to be rude. It was just so hot, and he'd completely exhausted himself. The air conditioning taunted him with a cool blast as he entered his new home through the garage. He couldn't wait to be able to stay inside unpacking with everyone else. He'd been making the boys help him bring in boxes, but they'd done all they could without being in the way. "Colby, Emmett, there's a kid outside who wants to meet you," Quentin called into the open, echoing townhouse. Around the corner, a stair near the top croaked. "What, Dad?" This was Emmett, 7 years old. "He said there's a kid outside," Quentin heard Colby, 9, mumble as he passed his brother down the stairs. Quentin began unloading the hand truck. His wife, Faith, appeared from one of the back rooms to start taking the boxes where they needed to go. When he rolled the empty hand truck back outside, Quentin saw his boys talking to the neighbor kid. Other children had joined them at the end of the driveway, too. The realtor mentioned lots of kids living in the neighborhood when he and Faith had toured the townhouse. Theirs was the last in a row of 6, across the street from a mirror row of 6 more, all painted the same naval blue with the same white trim. Some of the children's parents began to emerge from their garages and onto front patios, giving Quentin friendly waves. He was grateful they all had the manners to leave him be for the moment and let him finish his task. All but one. "Hello there," a smooth, even voice said behind him as Quentin loaded the hand truck again. He turned to look over his shoulder. This time, a man stood by the ramp. A man on the younger end of elderly, with thick glasses, thinning gray hair combed over his spotted scalp, and stubble that looked at least a couple of days old. "Hey, I'm Quentin Giles," Quentin said, trying not to be rude but continue working. "Rufus Card," the man replied. "I live right next door. I see the kids are already making friends. Those 2 boys are yours?" "Yes, sir," Quentin grunted, hoisting one of the last boxes onto the truck. "Let me give you a hand. You look beat," said Rufus. Quentin was going to dismiss him, but then thought, what's the harm? Let the guy help out. Rufus had even dressed like he came over to help in an old t-shirt and jeans with paint splotches and oil stains on them. He said, "You know what? I'd appreciate that. Thank you." The words weren't even out of his mouth before Rufus started clambering into the truck. For an older man, he moved well. Quentin wasn't up for conversation at the moment, but he made note to ask if Rufus did yoga later on. He was on the lookout for a new studio. Faith introduced herself when the men brought the last boxes inside. Quentin was careful not to do or say anything which could be interpreted as an invitation to stick around. He appreciated the help, but he really wanted to start unpacking. If he slowed down, he might not be able to power back up again. He turned to Faith and, trying to drop the hint it was time for Rufus to go, said, "Hey, could you call and order us some pizza? I'll have the boys come inside and keep unpacking." Rufus took the hint well. He smiled and said, "Welcome to the neighborhood, you two. It's a nice place to be." He turned to leave. Quentin followed him out. Halfway through the garage, Rufus turned back to him, slowing his stride. He said, "You know, I hate to spook you after we just met, but seeing those kids all talking reminds me there's a bit of a rumor that gets passed around by the kids here. I'm telling you now since I'm sure you're bound to hear it." "Oh, what's the rumor?" asked Quentin. It's a bit of an urban legend, I suppose, replied Rufus. The kids call it Bugman, or sometimes the praying mantis, spelled with an E in praying, so I'm told. They say it watches them from their closets at night. Silly, I know. You'd think they'd grow out of it, but no. Ask some of the other parents. They'll tell you there's nothing to worry about. Just thought I'd warn you in case the little ones start waking up with nightmares. My kids are grown, but I remember how they are. Sure, of course. Thanks, Quentin replied. Kids are kids. They make up stories to spin each other up all the time. My thoughts exactly, Rufus said. He returned to his own yard, and Quentin called the boys inside. Did you guys make some new friends? He asked as they walked back in together. Yeah, Colby replied. There's Ronnie and his brother Levi. He's the first kid who came over. They live across the street. And a girl named Marietta and another girl named Amaya. They're not related, they're just both girls. Amaya has a brother named Garrett, though. They said there's a kid named Ken who lives at the end of our side of the street, but he didn't come out. You got the inside scoop on the whole neighborhood, huh? Quentin chuckled. The boys told him more about the kids they met and what little they'd heard about their parents, but neither of them mentioned anything about a man bug or whatever Rufus warned him about. Faith hadn't found an opportunity to order pizza yet, so Quentin told her he would take care of it. He needed to take the moving truck back to the rental place anyway and could pick up Little Caesars on the way home. The Giles family spent the rest of the evening snacking on pizza while they unpacked their kitchen, bedroom, and bathroom essentials. They didn't make it far before everyone started bickering, a sure sign of how tired they all were. Quentin and Faith sent the boys to bed to get them out of the way, but they didn't make much progress afterward. They reached the point of diminishing returns and turned in for the night. Luckily, putting their king bed together was one of the tasks Quentin had completed. The boys' beds still leaned in pieces against the walls of their shared bedroom. Their new home had enough rooms for each of them to have their own, but Emmett was nervous about sleeping alone for the first time, and Colby said he didn't mind sharing a room for a while longer. Quentin and Faith thought he may have secretly been a bit nervous too. The boys each rolled out a sleeping bag on opposite sides of the room. The navy blue walls made it look dark even with the light on. Their parents had already promised to repaint it, but told them it would probably be a while before they got around to it. After the hard day's work, even in an unfamiliar and uncomfortable setting, the boys fell asleep with relative ease. Staying asleep proved to be the challenge. Colby woke to something he thought he'd heard in a dream. He lay with his eyes wide open, staring at the ceiling, wondering how long he would have to wait before he could be certain the sound hadn't been real. "Colby?" Emmett whispered from his sleeping bag across the room. "You're awake?" Colby whispered back. "Yeah, I heard something weird." Colby swallowed and rolled over to look at his brother. Emmett's finger was pointed up at the ceiling. He could just barely see him in the moonlight slicing through their closed blinds. What Colby thought and now knew he heard sounded like a cardboard box being dropped on the ceiling. It was heavy and abrupt, but soft. "Should we get Mom and Dad?" Emmett whispered. Colby stayed quiet for a few more seconds, then answered, "I don't want to bother them unless we hear it again." Right on cue, the ceiling croaked like an overgrown bullfrog. Emmett got tangled in his sleeping bag trying to tear himself out of it too quickly. Colby slipped his down without unzipping it, that would make too much sound, and helped his brother free himself before they both slipped out the door and padded down the foreign hallway, trying to remember which door opened to their parents' new room. After listening in the boys' room for a couple of minutes and hearing nothing, Quentin told them to drag their sleeping bags into his and Faith's room. He said they could sleep there that night, but tomorrow, after their beds were built, they would need to return to their own room. "New houses take some getting used to," he explained to his bleary-eyed boys. They nodded, content to worry about tomorrow when it came. The following day, the Giles family spent unpacking, arranging furniture, and generally putting their home together. Quentin, a software engineer, likened moving to sending a large file over email, the way it's broken into hundreds of thousands of bits, teleported across the internet, and reconstructed on someone else's machine. He wasn't sure what reaction he expected after sharing this profound analogy with his wife and sons, but the eye rolls and groans they made at him were not it. Faith declared a break around noon. She said she needed to get away from the mess and offered to pick up sandwiches for everyone. Quentin said he would take a break to eat when she got back and asked the boys to help him put their bed frames together. But after 15 minutes or so of the three of them frustrating each other, "Which screws are the long ones? It's not over here. Oh wait, would you just let go for a second so I can adjust it? Stop, you're pinching my finger." Quentin sent the boys outside to play. Being a sunny Sunday afternoon, most of the neighborhood's children were running, biking, or scootering around the street. The boys wandered out until the kids took notice and moved in to absorb them. This time, the boy at the end of the street, Ken Chiang, was outside playing with them, so Colby and Emmett got to meet him. He seemed overly reserved. The Giles boys knew plenty of shy kids at their old school, but Ken didn't seem like the type. It seemed like something was bothering him, but neither of them knew him even close to well enough to ask about it. Luckily, some of the other children did, and during a game of sardines, a version of hide-and-seek where one child hides at the beginning and the seekers join them when they find them until there's only one seeker left, Emmett found all the other kids hiding behind one of Marietta's mom's Camaro, whispering about Ken's troubles. "He's just right there. He just stands by my bathroom and looks at me," Emmett heard Ken whispering. He sprang out from behind the Camaro's bumper and shouted, "Found ya!" Garrett Samsa and Levi Machado shouted. Marietta and Amaya Samsa shrieked. Ronnie Machado and Ken flinched back. Colby stood up and put a hand on his brother's shoulder to guide him away from the group, but only to fill him in on what he'd been listening to. "Ken says some big creature has been coming into his room at night and watching him sleep. It's really creepy. I don't think you should hear it." "But I wanna," Emmett argued. Colby shrugged. "Okay, but don't bother me if you have nightmares tonight. I warned you." "He should definitely hear this too," Ronnie said over Colby's shoulder. "Why?" asked Colby. "Because there used to be another kid here," Ronnie's brother Levi said, standing up. "He used to live in your house. His room was the first one at the top of your stairs." "That's our room," Emmett whispered to Colby. Levi made his eyes wide and dramatic. Ronnie took over. "Yeah, his name was Kyle, and he was the first one who told us about praying mantis." "Stop it, bro. Don't scare a little kid about his new house," Garrett urged. "I'm not little, I'm 7, said Emmett. In fairness, he barely looked a day over 6, but to 12-year-olds like Garrett, Marietta, and Ronnie, he may as well have been 3. "If he says he can take it, tell him," said Levi. He was closer to Colby's age, having just turned 10. He'd always been small for his age, though. "Take what?" asked poor Emmett. Ronnie leaned over Garrett's shoulder and said, "Kyle saw him at the end of your upstairs hallway in the middle of the night. Something or someone, tall, covered in all black with big shining eyes, just like a praying mantis." "That sounds made up," Colby said, putting blind faith behind his own words. "What was it?" Emmett asked. "Probably just some weird shadow he saw in the dark. You know how your eyes can trick you at night," Marietta offered. Eager to show support for her hypothesis, Garrett said, "I see weird stuff at night all the time, but I know it's just my eyes messing with me." "How do you know it's just your eyes?" Levi taunted. "Because I'm smart enough to know what I think I see doesn't actually make any sense," Garrett fired back. "But how do you know?" Ronnie asked, joining his brother in antagonizing their friend. Colby didn't think he liked the Machado boys very much. He got the sense the other kids tolerated them, but only barely. Garrett just shook his head. He gave Colby an apologetic shrug, then to Marietta said, "I think you're still right." "Yeah, 'cause you're in love with her," Ronnie jabbed. During the eruption of belligerent voices that followed, Colby whispered to Emmett that they should go. As much as he wanted to hear more about what that kid Kyle had seen in their house, he didn't think he would learn much more on that particular afternoon. Not with the Machados around, anyway. They They devoured the sandwiches Faith brought home in silence, only speaking to tell their parents they were fine after being asked if everything was okay. Quentin recalled what Rufus said about the kids spreading rumors, but decided to leave it be for the time. The kids were probably just tired from all the work they'd done and from all the work yet to come. Colby noticed Emmett had slid all the way against the wall, legs and all, when he came in from brushing his teeth that night. He guessed his brother had probably been thinking about the sounds in the ceiling when he crawled into bed. Colby had to admit the image of a bug man had crept into his thoughts on his way to and from the bathroom a minute prior. He tried not to imagine seeing what Kyle saw at the end of his dark hallway. He told himself that if he heard a single bump in the night, regardless of how his parents might dismiss him, he would run to them. He would bring them back to hear the sounds for themselves. And that's exactly what he did. He'd woken up after a thud directly above his head, but when they came to investigate, all his parents heard were a couple of very faint scuttling sounds. "I'll admit, there's something up there, but it sounds like just a mouse or maybe a bat. They get trapped in attics sometimes," said Quentin. Then, under his breath, "If the poor guy doesn't find his way out soon, it's gonna stink bad up here in a couple days." "Why?" asked Emmett. "Poop," Faith sputtered. "He'll poop a whole bunch and make it stink up there." "Oh yeah," Emmett laughed, fully buying this cover-up. Colby caught his parents silently arguing about protecting Emmett's feelings from the reality that the mouse might perish and rot. His mom won after mouthing, "He needs to go back to sleep." "Okay, boys, sleep well," Quentin said, grabbing the doorknob with one hand and putting his other arm around Faith to steer her out. "Good night," the boys replied in unison. Faith blew them a kiss and allowed Quentin to close the door. Hours later, Emmett woke up from a dream. It wasn't a bad dream, monotonous actually. In it, he'd been unpacking boxes in his bedroom. Behind him, he heard Colby open their closet. Its hinges groaned loudly at the beginning and again at the end of their partial rotation. He'd turned around, but Colby wasn't there. That's when he woke up and, even before his eyes fully adjusted, saw the closet door, which had definitely been closed when they went to bed and again after they woke up to the mouse noises, was now open. Emmett dared not move. He dared not speak. He tried not to even breathe. He turned his head ever so slightly toward Colby to see if his big brother had woken up as well. He appeared to still be sleeping. Sounded like it too. Emmett kept his eyes mostly shut in case some bug-faced creature was watching him from the shadows of the closet, but he didn't close them all the way so he could watch for movement. He felt his pent-up breath building in the base of his throat, ready to emerge as a scream the moment he saw or heard anything. Then he heard the hinges groan again. The closet door did not move, though. His dream had misattributed the sound in the unfamiliar house to the wrong door. This time, hearing the sound while awake, he saw it actually came from the bedroom door, which crept slowly inward. "Maybe it's just Mom checking on us," he thought. Then, "Maybe Dad's checking for that noise again." But as the door opened wide enough, a dark, hunched figure darted through, ran across the short space between the two doors, and disappeared into the closet, shutting the door softly behind it. His scream broke loose. Emmett woke his brother up with his shouts and cries of abject terror. Faith barreled down the hallway. She burst in, shouting, and made a flailing lunge toward Emmett's bed before her eyes seemed to clear and she paused, panting. The chaotic symphony of noise made by Emmett, Faith, and Colby masked any sound coming from behind the closet door. After Quentin turned on the light and managed to get a semi-coherent explanation of what happened, he opened the closet. Besides the boys' hanging shirts, it was completely empty. "Anything?" Faith asked, keeping her distance from the closet as Quentin searched it. "Everything seems to be in place. Nobody here," Quentin replied. What about that? Faith asked, pointing up at the small scuttle door inside the boys' closet, the door to the attic. Quentin looked up and swallowed hard. Hey Emmett, how long after you saw that shadow in here did you yell for us? Like the second I saw it, Emmett replied. Colby stared wide-eyed between his brother and father, his eyes flicking back and forth trying to process what his father might be thinking. See, Quentin said, turning to Faith. There's no way anyone could have climbed up there, opened that thing, and replaced it before we got in here, he said. Faith grimaced. You're probably right, but would you just go up and check? I'd feel a lot better, and I'm sure the boys would too. Emmett would definitely feel better, Colby stated. I've never even looked up there, have you? Faith asked. Quentin shook his head. I think the inspector popped his head up there, but I haven't seen it myself. If it'll help everyone get back to sleep, I'll take a look. It took a better part of 10 minutes for Quentin to unbury his ladder from behind layers of boxes in the garage, bring it upstairs, and empty enough out of the closet to fit it in. The boys were too scared to get out of their beds and help, and Faith stayed with them for comfort. Sweating, Quentin pushed open the scuttle door and moved it aside. He reached his hand down to his pocket, then grunted. God, I left my phone by our bed. Faith, could you? Faith patted Emmett on the head as she stood to leave. Quentin gave the boys a promising smile after she left, trying to show them he wasn't scared and there was nothing to be afraid of. Then, right above his ear, something squeaked. Quentin swore and nearly fell off the ladder. It tipped onto two legs. Attempting to right it, he struck his head against the scuttle door frame, which made him swear again, this time using a word Colby and Emmett had never heard before. What happened? Faith asked, running back into the room. Her extended arm held Quentin's phone, the flashlight already on. I told you it's just a frickin' mouse, her husband growled. Faith heard a faint giggle escape the hand Colby had clasped over his own mouth and shot him a warning glance. Are you okay? Faith asked. Yeah, I'm fine. Give me the phone. She did. Quentin somewhat reluctantly raised the light into the attic. He hoped to scare off any critters crouching near the scuttle hole before he put his face right next to them. He did hear multiple animals scurry away, but saw none of them. More importantly, he didn't see any big, shadowy figures. The attic was, he admitted, quite creepy, with flaps of lazily cut Tyvek house wrap hanging from the roof and along the firewall separating their home from the next. But after a couple of 360-degree turns, Quentin determined the only creatures up there were those small enough to hide within the insulation. Well, it's definitely full of mice, he said, coming down. I'll throw some poison up there tomorrow. Hopefully that'll take care of them. Poison? Faith asked, appalled. Well, it's either that or we let them chew through the walls. They're dead either way. Faith whispered, Maybe we should talk about this tomorrow. Quentin looked at the boys. Colby looked ready to get back to sleep, but Emmett's big, wet eyes glistened at him, begging for comfort. Quentin said, Everything's fine, Emmett. Those mice can't get in here, and even if they did, they're just cute little guys. They won't hurt you. I saw something big, though, Emmett whimpered. It wasn't a mouse, Dad. I saw it. It looked like a praying mantis. A praying mantis? Faith asked. Yeah, that, said Emmett. What does a praying mantis even look like? Colby asked his brother. Emmett turned to him, a mixture of fear and anger bubbling in his features. Colby said, He doesn't even know. He's just saying that because that's what the other kid who lived here said he saw. What other kid? Asked Quentin. Ronnie from across the street said a kid named Kyle who lived here before us saw a giant bug man who looked like a praying mantis in our hallway. Oh boy, Faith sighed. Quentin sat on Emmett's bed and put an arm around him. Looking at Colby but speaking to both of them, he said, You know when that neighbor guy, Rufus, stopped over yesterday? He told me the kids in this neighborhood like to make up stories to scare each other. Now, I don't know this Ronnie kid yet, but does he seem like someone who might try to scare you by making up a story like that? He seems kind of like a... Colby trailed off, looking at his mother for permission to speak freely. She smiled and rolled her eyes. Go ahead. He's kind of a jerk. Oof, major accusation, Quentin replied, smirking. He said, So, do you think it's possible a jerk like Ronnie might have been trying to scare you guys? Yeah, Colby admitted. Emmett stayed quiet. Emmett, Faith prompted. Emmett looked down at his sheets. But I saw him. Quentin gave him a squeeze, looking to Faith for help. She shrugged. Do you want to come sleep with us tonight? She asked him. Emmett nodded vigorously against his father's chest. Will you be okay in here alone? She asked Colby. Yeah, I'll be fine, he replied, filling his voice with confidence, but internally he wasn't so sure. Nevertheless, after his parents and brother left the room, he pulled his sheets up almost all the way over his head and, eventually, fell asleep. Quentin picked up some poison from Ace Hardware and tossed it across the attic the following afternoon. No one spoke much of the incident the previous night, and all felt better now that some action had been taken to potentially solve the problem. Still, Faith found various tasks for each of the boys to keep them inside after the rest of the neighborhood had gone out to play. She didn't want Emmett getting spun up by more creepypasta nonsense until they all got at least one full night of sleep. She had so much to get done, but she was dragging. She'd struggled to sleep after returning to her bed the previous night. She knew Quentin looked around the attic and saw nothing but rodents making noises, but she found this explanation difficult to fully accept. See, she'd already been awake when Emmett began screaming. A sound had awoken her, too. Not fully enough to bring her out of the shallow end of deep sleep, but enough to power on her senses. What yanked her to full alert was a second sound. The sound of a footstep right outside she and Quentin's bedroom door. And had she heard the door latch right before? When Emmett began screaming, Faith charged to his room so aggressively because she thought she may have just detected an intruder. But there had been no one in the boys' room, nor in their closet. No one could have gotten out through their room without using the window, which was still locked on the inside, or climbing into the attic. But Quentin checked it. Well, Faith told herself, he is my kid. Guess he has my imagination too. Guess we're just reacting to this new place the same way. The following days and nights supported that idea. Nearly a week passed without Emmett waking up from more than a full bladder. Quentin and Faith caught up on sleep, then banked the excess to energize their efforts to finish putting the house together. Everyone seemed much happier by the week's end. But at almost the exact end of their first full week in the house, 11:52 on Saturday night, one of the boys woke them all with a scream. Both Quentin and Faith made the desperate charge to the boys' room this time, because this time, Emmett was not screaming. It was Colby. Colby had never been prone to bad dreams at any point in his childhood. Never had he woken them up because he had a nightmare. He was right there in the closet, Colby shouted when they barged in. His trembling finger pointed at the closet door. Faith put a protective arm around Emmett and felt him shaking. Did you see him too? She whispered. Emmett nodded. She looked up at Quentin to make sure he'd seen this confirmation. How did you see him? Quentin asked. Colby jumped out of his bed and ran to his father's side, shifting behind him. The door was open, Dad. I saw him standing there when I woke up. This sent Quentin's heart into his throat, since the closet door was now closed. Who did you see? He asked his son. It was... Unable to wait for his answer, Quentin impatiently waved Faith and Emmett out of the room. He began pushing Colby toward the door too, asking, It was who? I know you're scared, but if you know... Praying Mantis, Colby whispered. It was really him, Dad. I saw his eyes, like for real, all big and shiny, just staring at me. Just wait in the hallway with Mom, Quentin said, nudging him through the doorway. Faith, call the police, please. Even if it's nothing, I'd still rather they be on their way here. Emmett handed Faith her phone, having already retrieved it from her bedside, knowing she would need it. She saw the honest desperation in his eyes. She nodded to him like a good soldier, then herded the boys toward the stairs. She didn't make them go down, though, only because she didn't want them to be alone, but couldn't leave Quentin. A 911 dispatcher answered the phone. Faith briefly explained how they thought there might be an intruder in their home. The dispatcher advised them not to open the closet, but before Faith could relay this instruction to her husband, he'd already turned the knob. He yanked the door open, jumping back to dodge any incoming attacks, but none came. The closet, at least at a glance, looked empty. Faith saw him eyeing the scuttle door and pleaded with Quentin not to go into the attic. The dispatcher backed her up. This time, Quentin heeded their advice. He led his family outside to wait for the responding officers. When they arrived, Quentin led them upstairs. He had to bring them his ladder to reach the attic, which he could tell made them skeptical of the possibility an intruder could have gotten up to the scuttle door without a trace, a doubt Quentin vocally shared. Only one of the officers stuck his head into the attic to look around with his high-powered flashlight. "The only concern I have," the officer said, brushing cobwebs off his elbows after he descended, "is that big piece of plywood up against the firewall." "Oh, is it like a fire code thing?" asked Quentin. "Huh? Oh, no. Well, I don't know, actually. I just mean it's the only thing I could see that could be hiding a way in, something along those lines. A hideaway, maybe? But I mean, it's bolted to the wall on your side of the firewall, so I don't see how anyone on the other side could open it." "Want me to go up there and check?" Quentin asked, a bit annoyed this hadn't already been done by the concerned officer. Well, we could. Honestly, it doesn't look too stable up there, and we might bust through your ceiling, though. I think our best option would be to see if we can wake up your neighbor to see if we can have a look on the other side of the wall. Could be there's somebody hiding out on his side." "Oh, no, please don't do that. It's the middle of the night," gasped Quentin. "Listen, it's just my kids. They claim they saw this guy, but all the neighborhood kids told them this scary story about some bug man, and I think this has just gotten their imaginations going. Somebody's headlights probably flashed through the blinds and made a shadow or something." The officers appeared hesitant to accept this as the final explanation. "Look," said Quentin, "I'll find a safe way to check out that board tomorrow. You said it looks like it's secured, though?" The officer shrugged with one shoulder. "I mean, it was bolted into the brick, so..." Quentin nodded. "Can I take a look before you guys go?" The officers stuck around while Quentin had a look at the plywood square mounted to his side of the firewall. 4 sturdy bolts secured it to the brick behind it. Time appeared to have welded them in place. "Yeah, that looks like it can wait until the morning," he said. "Sorry to waste your guys' time." The other officer said, "No worries, sir. If you hear back or see anything else, just call us right back. We'll try to stick around this area for a while just in case." "Well, I appreciate that," Quentin replied, grinning. "I'll walk you out." Quentin left the ladder in the boys' room so he could take a closer look at the board the next morning like he promised to. He positioned himself on 2 struts to make sure he wouldn't fall through the ceiling, then gave the board a couple of strong tugs. Although it gave a little more than he expected, it held fast to the wall. The centimeter or so he managed to pull it away certainly wouldn't have allowed anyone to pass through. He shared this good news with the rest of the family while he carried the ladder back downstairs, but it didn't seem to put anyone at ease. Rufus happened to be weeding his front flower garden when Quentin carried the ladder back to the garage. "Morning, neighbor," he called, waving cheerily. "Morning," Quentin waved back. Rufus stood, propping up one leg at a time, then pushing the rest of himself up with his hands on his knees. He said, "Say, I don't mean to be nosy, but something woke me up last night, and when I peeked out the window..." "Oh, the cops? Yeah, sorry. Hope it wasn't us that woke you," Quentin said. He smiled to show everything was fine. "So everyone's okay in there?" Rufus asked. "You bet. The boys just thought they saw something. What you told me about the kids spreading rumors, I think I probably should have shared that warning with them sooner." Ah, Rufus nodded thoughtfully. Hey, there is one thing I wanted to ask you, though, Quentin started. He didn't know Rufus very well yet, hardly at all, so he felt a bit awkward about what he needed to ask. Have you ever gone up to your attic? Have you looked up there recently? Oh, we get our fair share of mice here, that I know, Rufus replied. I've got to stick traps around the house and in the garage, especially in the spring and summer to keep them down. Maybe mice are what you heard up there. As for my attic, I'm a bit too creaky to be climbing up there. Quentin said, Psh, you seem like you're staying spry enough. Anyway, I was just up in mine this morning, hence the, He stuck his thumb over his shoulder, indicating the ladder. Anything interesting? Rufus asked. Nah. Well, there is this board bolted to the firewall for some reason. You know anything about that? A board stuck to... No, can't say so. Your predecessors used to complain about bats. Maybe they patched up some kind of hole up there. Maybe. Well, I'll let you get back to it. The police sort of offered to take a peek in your attic for you if you decide you'd like someone to. I told them not to bother you last night, but I can always call them back here just to be sure. The kids, they were pretty genuinely freaked out last night. I'm sure it was just a night terror sort of thing, but they really had us going for a bit. I'm sure, Rufus said, smiling compassionately. He raised his trowel in salute and returned to his knees in the garden. Quentin gave him a quick wave and went back inside. I found it, Faith said the moment he entered the kitchen. Found what? He asked. Faith held up a small white device with a long cord wound between her fingers. It was the video baby monitor they'd kept since Emmett stopped sleeping in his crib. They'd never officially decided against having more children, so they'd kept most of the pricier baby items just in case they might ever need them again. What do you need that for? Quentin asked, his heart rate spiking at the possibility that this was Faith's strange way of telling him she was pregnant. She said, I thought we could set it up in the boys' room. We can set it to record, right? I think so, Quentin said, trying to remember. Well, if we can, we should have it record all night. Then, if anybody wakes up screaming, we can look back and show them there wasn't actually anything there. Or find out there was, Quentin moaned spookily, waving his hands in ghostly fashion. Faith and the boys' reactions told him this was in bad taste. He apologized. Sorry, no, that's a good idea, the camera. I'll see if I can set it to record. I think it pairs with an app on our phones, right? Hopefully it's still on the App Store. It was, and after re-downloading the app and pairing the baby monitor to it, Quentin set the camera on the boys' dresser between their beds, facing directly at the closet. He considered turning on motion alert notifications, but didn't want to be woken up every time one of the boys got up to pee, so he left it off. He thought Faith's plan to review the footage after the fact would suffice. The following night passed outside of the Giles' consciousness. None of them woke even once, not even to use the bathroom. They all clearly needed to catch up on sleep. Faith wondered aloud to Quentin the next morning if the camera put the boys at ease. Not wanting to get out of bed, Quentin snuggled up next to her and opened the baby monitor's app just to see if anything remotely interesting happened while they were asleep. He zoomed out on the timeline, which showed sound waves for parents to easily see when their child woke up crying or babbling. The audio track looked almost entirely flat, with only 2 sharp peaks just after midnight. Faith pointed out that a motion alert was tagged at the same time. Quentin had turned off the alert notifications, but the app still tagged the motion on the timeline. Quentin scrolled to where the audio peak occurred and hit play. Despite Faith's warmth pressing against him, he suddenly felt numb with cold. The audio peak was not, as he expected, one of the boys coughing or talking in their sleep. It was caused by the sound of the closet doorknob popping free of the lock set. The motion was not one of the boys getting out of bed to use the bathroom. The alert had been triggered by the closet door across from the sleeping boys slowly creeping open until it gaped wide. A shadow-masked hand could be seen retracting from the doorknob into the darkness inside. Faith and Quentin leapt out of bed and ran for the boys' room. Faith got there first. She shouted down the hall, "They're okay," before Quentin got through his bedroom door. He stopped there and scrubbed forward on the video. The closet door remained open for nearly 15 minutes without any sound or motion coming from it. Then, the shadow-masked hand re-emerged, stretching toward the doorknob to bring it in and close the door, causing the second audio spike when it latched shut. He exported the video to his iPhone's camera roll and opened it. Using the phone's editing features, he brightened the video and played the contrast. Still, he could not quite make out the figure lurking in the closet. He scrolled through every possible adjustment, moving each as far as it would go in either direction to find out which way would bring out more detail. Eventually, he increased the exposure all the way, dropped the contrast to almost zero, and tinted the video green. Something about this combination finally erased the majority of the shadows in the closet, bringing forth a horrifying image. There, crouched between his children's hanging shirts, was a person dressed entirely in black from head to toe, even wearing what looked like a turtleneck to hide the skin of their neck. On their head, they wore, it was difficult to see, but what could only be a gas mask with a round filter over the mouth and two huge, shining ovals for eyes. Eyes which looked incredibly bug-like in the dark. Like a praying mantis. "Faith!" he shouted, ejecting off the mattress. "Faith, get them out! Get out of the house!" This time, he waited for the police to arrive and let them open the closet. The two officers and their sergeant touched nothing else in the room, did not even open the curtains before swarming around the door. Quentin watched from the hallway as they barked at anyone inside the closet to come out. The flashlights shining under their gun barrels made the door's dull wood appear almost reflective. Finally, the sergeant ordered one of the officers, "Open it!" Quentin shrank back. The officer kept his pistol with the mounted flashlight trained on the opening that was about to appear as he twisted the knob. He opened it no more than 2 inches before shouting and jumping back, "Hands up! Hands up! Hands up!" The others moved tactfully around the swinging door. All 3 flashlights illuminated the man inside. He stood at least 2 feet taller than any of the police. His shining black eyes stared down at them. Quentin awaited the inevitable gunfire. He doubted this beast would go peacefully. "Dispatch, can we get a detective to my location? We have 1 DOA. No additional units at this time," the sergeant spoke into his radio. Then he holstered his weapon. The others followed his lead, shutting off their flashlights as they did so. "DOA?" Quentin asked, before he remembered he did know what it meant. Dead on arrival. The sergeant donned a light blue surgical glove and reached in to turn on the closet light. Quentin's shallow breath actually deepened as his mind disassociated from what his eyes showed it. The thing in the closet was not some insectoid beast. It was only a man after all. A man wearing a gas mask and dressed entirely in black. He was hanging 3 feet off the floor by his neck and swaying limply from the wind of the sucking closet door. "Sir, you're going to need to head back outside, please," one of the officers said. "But what about—" "Sir," the sergeant stepped in. "She's right. This is now an active crime scene. We're going to need you to step out. Did you say you called this in because of a video?" "Yeah, I saw it on my phone," Quentin replied, utterly dazed. "Well, we'll want to see that as soon as you're able to show us, but for now, I need you out." The Giles family watched the paramedics wheel the covered body out their front door 2 hours later. Quentin approached them, only to be intercepted by the detective who had spent one of those 2 hours questioning him in the driveway. "Mr. Giles, you can't," he said. But what if I can ID him? Quentin asked. I just want to see his face. We know who he is, the detective replied. Quentin leaned forward as if this information would suddenly allow him to see through the sheet on the stretcher now being loaded into the ambulance. When the detective leaned to block his gaze, Quentin demanded, Tell me who it is! Tell me who's been in my kid's room! The detective made a concerned glance toward Colby and Emmett standing on either side of their mother. Faith correctly interpreted this look and led the boys a few paces away. The detective then led Quentin to the stretcher's side. The paramedics took their cue and paused, loading it in. The detective pulled the sheet off the dead man's face. After a moment's silence, he asked, Had you met him? Yeah, we talked a few times, Quentin murmured. Do you know why he might have been in your house? Rufus? Hell no. I said we talked, but I never had any reason to let him in. Jeez, Rufus? He didn't seem like I wouldn't have ever thought. We're still waiting on the warrant for his place, said the detective, but we already figured out how he got in. Through the attic? Quentin guessed. Well, yes, through a big piece of plywood on your side of the firewall. Quentin hissed, I literally just checked that. It was mounted into the brick. Couldn't move it. We can explain that, said the detective. See, it was actually open for us when we went up. He mounted 4 hooks to the back of that board and tied a rope on his side to hold it firm against the wall. Those bolts were stuck in holes too big for them. They were just there to keep it from rotating, I think. So he had a whole apparatus up there just to get in and out of our house? Quentin asked. I hate to say so, but that's the way it looks. He also had a rope ladder he might have kept on his side to drag out whenever he crossed over. That's also what he used to, But why? Quentin asked. Hang himself or break in? I am assuming he hung himself after he saw the camera and realized he was going to get caught. You know what they say about assumptions, but I'd say that's about as safe of one as any, the detective replied. Not much else could be learned until a judge finally signed the warrant for Rufus Card's townhome. Shortly after, all was revealed. Rufus had been entering not only the Giles' home, but every adjoining townhome on that side of the street. He used a homemade compound to dissolve the mortar in the firewall to create passageways, but the fumes from his compound required him to wear a gas mask while working in his neighbors' attics. The investigators speculated he eventually grew fond of wearing the mask while lurking. It probably made him feel an extra layer of security, or perhaps he found it helped him tap into his dark side. A file folder in one of Rufus's desk drawers unveiled the rest of the mystery, though the truth left some residents wishing they'd gone on not knowing Rufus's purpose. It would have been comparatively more comfortable to go on believing he was simply a pervert who enjoyed a bit of voyeurism. Part of the file consisted of handwritten notes, the rest drawings. The drawings depicted specific areas of the houses he'd entered, mainly everyone's bedrooms, and included notes about which family members slept in each room, which positions they slept in, and where exactly in their bed they most often tended to sleep. His notes revealed the reason for Rufus's unsettling research. Rufus Card had a dream, a desire, a twisted bucket list checkbox to fulfill. He wanted to go out as one of the most infamous killers in American history, and he wanted to accomplish this by murdering his entire neighborhood. Well, he admitted in his notes, only one side of the street, but that's not how the news stations would report it, would they? And he wanted to do it in a single night. He planned to methodically enter each home, slit everyone's throats while they slept, and move along down the street until he was the only human being left breathing. Other animals would be breathing, though, at least until he dispatched them too. He would no longer need them. These were the mice and bats he kept caged in his spare bedroom to be released into his neighbors' attics as decoys for any sounds he accidentally made during the night. The police showed one of the most recent journal entries to Quentin and Faith to see if it lined up with their recollection of events. It read, "The younger new boy almost caught me on my way back. Needing to study this family has already set me back. The last thing I want is another delay, but I cannot risk going back yet. I put mice above them last night. Once they're dead and gone, I'll go back. Just have to soothe them back to sleep." Us kids kind of rallied around Colby and Emmett after that. Even I stopped being such a jerk. Yes, I admit it. I, Ronnie Machado, was a bit of a bully back then, and I'm afraid I led my brother Levi down the same path for a while. The praying mantis, Rufus Card, he scared us all straight though, at least for a while. You already know Ken Chang was seeing him, as well as Amaya Samsa, and that kid Kyle claimed to have seen him, but what we learned later was that Garrett Samsa had seen him a couple times too. Garrett just didn't want Marietta thinking he was getting scared by little kid stuff. See, me, my brother Levi, and Marietta all lived on the opposite side of the street, so no praying mantis for us. It's easy to mock something you'll never have to experience. Once we saw the aftermath, though, we all shut up. We all shut up about a lot of stuff. Because when you learn something you doubted like that was true, it becomes hard to write a lot of stuff off. In some ways, the recovery might have been easier for those Giles kids and the Samsas and Ken. They were all proven right. Well, the reason I started telling this was just to warn you to take a peek in your attics every once in a while. I guess I've said some other stuff too now, but don't let that distract you from what I'm really telling you. You might just have more than a few little critters up in your attic. Better check. You made it out. Congratulations. If you enjoyed the story, please rate, like, review, or subscribe. For ad-free episodes and behind-the-scenes episodes I call Into the Woods, become a patron with the link in the description. You can also support the show by buying merch. That link is also in the description below. To stay up to date, follow me on Instagram and TikTok at The Warning Woods. And when you feel ready, meet me here for another journey into the Warning Woods. Thank you for listening.